fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And we are getting into some discussions about alternate history for this month, which we're also talking about over on the website at fullybooked.ca. And you can also sign up for the newsletter at fullybooked.ca/newsletter, so you guys can head over there and check all of that coverage out too, if you want to take a look at kind of some of the other alternate history stuff that we're taking a look at this month.
And news.
And news, yeah. But I guess it just kind of made sense in hopping into a chat about this stuff is to kind of talk about alternate history as like a subgenre of science fiction and speculative fiction, in terms of kind of what it is and maybe define it a little bit and, you know, like take a look at like some kind of good examples of it and an idea of like maybe where that differs from historical fiction or historical fantasy and how a lot of those also kind of overlap with each other as well. Yeah. Anyway, before we get started on that, Shireen, what is on your nightstand right now?
Well, I picked up the Atlas 6. I keep seeing a whole bunch of stuff about it. I keep seeing it on the bookshelves in the stores. And I know that there's been, I believe, 3 books that have come out in the series.
Yeah.
So I picked it up. It's kind of like dark academia kind of style. Really not what I expected. I don't know why. I think I got it confused with, what is it, Circe or whatever it is, the Song of Achilles or something.
Oh, yeah.
In my head, I had it like pegged as like some sort of like, Greek mythology kind of thing.
Those are very different books.
Very, very different books. And I don't know why, but I thought that it was going to be this. And then when I read the back cover, I was like, well, this looks really good. And so I picked it up, started reading it. Pretty interesting. It's about 6 people who have talents.
Yeah.
And they are recruited by this man named Atlas. And it's for some like top secret mission, basically. It's basically... a little bit to do with Greek mythology, so I see where I'm going with this. They are the protectors of the Library of Alexandria.
Oh, okay.
So, like, all the knowledge that comes with it and whatnot. So I'm not too far into it. I've met all the characters now. They've got some interesting powers.
Okay.
And we haven't kind of gone deep into what those powers are too much. Like, some of them, it seems that they can, like, set fires. One girl can, like, grow things like in nature, so like but it's more that like plants like listen to her and want to grow. They've all got different things that they can do. One girl is able to like get into people's heads and like influence them like seriously. Anyway, so apparently they do this pretty regularly. They go and recruit 6 new people and whatnot. And so anyway, we'll see what that is, but it's pretty good.
Cool.
What about you, Megan?
So I just quickly, because it's a novella, so it's very short and sweet. I quickly read through What Moves the Dead by Kingfisher, and it's essentially a retelling of the fall of the House of Usher.
Oh, okay.
At its essence, essentially, and it follows like a lot of the same kinds of things, but it is a retelling. It's done a little bit differently. It's not long at all. It's like a very short novella. So good. So good. Creepy. Really good. Really well written. I know it had gotten like a lot of acclaim and Alive was really popular when it was published, and I can see why. Anyway, it's really good. I haven't really read very much T. Kingfisher, but in the realm of kind of horror stuff, they're pretty big overall, I would say. So I'm looking forward to I have a couple of others at home that I've gotten now, and I'm looking forward to kind of getting into those as well, either with other novellas or other like full-length novels. But yeah, no, really good. I mean, like The Fall of the House of Usher is just like a really cool story in the first place. It's like why it's up there for me in terms of like Poe short stories, and it's one of those that I've always enjoyed. So I'm always down for anything that's gonna kind of like give a new spin on something like that. And even if you don't wind up liking it that much, it's just really interesting to see a different perspective that way. Oh,
definitely. Like we always like rereading some of our favorite stories.
For sure.
If it's a little different. So, I mean, it sparks thoughts. It's not like you're going to read it and not have any thoughts one way or another, right?
No.
So, yeah.
No, that's it. Okay. So, in terms of alternate history and alternate history fiction, it's sort of, I guess it's kind of hard to fully classify it as like one subgenre or the other. I think that like technically it's officially sort of classified as like a subgenre, oftentimes anyway, of science fiction or historical fiction. Like those are the things largely that it vacillates between in terms of where does it fit in the world of subgenres.
And I feel that like depending on what you're reading, some of it will go more on the sci-fi side, and some will go more on the historical fiction side.
Definitely, because you can either lean into the full science aspect of things, being the reason that some stuff is able to be changed or has changed, or you can lean into something as simple as like a time travel story that just allows a person to like, you know, wind up somewhere and make different decisions or to change the course of something themselves without using technology.
Which, like, it makes sense, right? Like, if you're going to go the route of, like, a time travel or something, then inevitably you're going to have a character who's either coming in with, like, technologies, ideals, something that's going to, like, drastically change the course of your timeline because they're introducing something, like, early that would not have happened if they hadn't kind of gone in there. And so that's where you get that more on the side of the sci-fi, and that's where you get, like... I believe like an example of this would be like The Man in the High Castle, where like everything is very much like forward technologically than what it would have been.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's it, which presents that's a much more dystopian world, basically, in terms of like, you know, what actually happened and what the technology was that existed at that time. It's something that's been around for, I think it's something that's been around for a lot longer than we think it has, because, you know, I think it's always fascinating. It's always fascinating to kind of ask yourself those what if scenarios. Yeah. Right? Like, oh, like, you know, what if this had gone differently? And like, you know, we spoke with us in the previous episode, the idea of like, what if something had just gone differently in my own life? Mm-hmm. Potentially, where would I be? Yep. How would my life be different? How would my relationships possibly be different as well? Who would I be as a person? Who would I be as a person? Like, what kinds of differences would there be if I hadn't have had the experiences that I've had up until this point? Yeah. You know? Yeah, so it's always interesting. I think where people probably lose a lot of it, it's sort of differentiating particularly the idea of an alternate history versus the historical fiction, right? Oh, yes, two very different things. Yeah. Exactly, because, I mean, we've talked about historical fiction before on the podcast, and largely what we spoke about was understanding that it takes place during, whatever the story is, takes place during a period that has already passed, but presents something like, you know, not based necessarily in historical fact. Sometimes there can be a little bit, but most of the time it's just based in completely fictionalized characters and their experiences. And so, that's something that we talked about in the realm of like, you know, like your Bridgerton and your different things like that. Because yes, it takes place during a time period that existed and has passed. And now we're, you know, presenting it, but with, that's it, not human beings that actually existed. Or we're kind of creating characters that, you know, there was probably a family that existed, and, you know, what would their life have looked like? But it's not based on them. It's not based on them, and, like, we have no historical data on these people to, like, call it back to, whereas, like, again, the one that we spoke about last week, these were real historical people, but we took liberties with them and we changed the course of history. The course of history because of decisions. And it's interesting, I mean, like, okay, so far, you know, we've talked about, if we're talking about a few different things, right, and we're going to be talking about different types of alternate history this month, where we've talked about My Lady Jane, which is just an alternate history presented as it's happening, different like the narrative is taking you into different places because we put this into like a fantasy world in which these things have not, like, these things did not actually happen, and like the shape-shifting people did not actually exist, and like all those kinds of things that are different, and Edward doesn't die in that story and things like that. Anyway, we talked about all of this already. It's kind of both, right? Like My Lady Jane is both like historical alternate and fiction. Yes. Yeah, you know? But I find versus I don't think it'll be out yet by the time we're doing this episode. Probably not. I think we're in between right now. But we're going to be talking about something like 11/22/63 as an option this month as well. And that is a really different kind of historical, alternate history. That's a different kind of flavor of it, because that is a person in the modern age, not of that time period, in the modern age, making specific changes in order to impact those events. But they both play out as alternate history, but they're totally different that way.
Because that one's more on the side of sci-fi.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, whereas, like, My Lady Jane is more an example of, like the history being different.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
I mean, obviously, again, if you take out the fantasy aspect.
I mean, yeah, obviously, that's fine. No, it's interesting to see, though, because I was, like, taking a look a little bit, and apparently, like, the idea of positing or presenting an alternate history has been around for a very, very, very long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what I was looking at, even, like, pre-19th century, for instance, back in, like, the 1400s, there was a story written called, what is it, Tyrant Low Blanche or something? I don't think I'm pronouncing that properly, apologies. But anyway, which is written back in like the 1400s, which posited an alternate history in which a knight from Brittany stops the Turks from taking Constantinople in the war.
I see.
Yeah, and that would change the course of things. So it's interesting.
Again, more on the historical side, right?
100%, yeah, that's it. It's just interesting to think that it would have been like that far back. And even apparently Nathaniel Hawthorne published a story called Pease Correspondence in 1845, in which a New England man is treated as a crazy person, basically, because he's able to experience or perceive a different reality in which long dead famous people are still alive.
Oh, interesting.
Not necessarily like healthy, but alive. So in the year 1845. So he speaks to the poets Burns, Byron, Shelley, Keats, Edmund Kean, George Canning, who was a politician, and even Napoleon.
I don't know about that one. Like, maybe I just feel like there was so much of literature where there was like an exploration of like, what if my idols like were still alive and I was able to talk to them? What would they say to me?
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting one to consider, I guess. I mean, I think that, when you get like a little bit later, they really started getting into it more. Like, obviously, there's like the Man in the High Castle that we just said, with the idea of obviously if there being like
the other side.
The other side, there's a lot of that in all kinds of different for all kinds of different wars, particularly that's it conflicts throughout history. There's a lot of that. There's some there have been several about the American Civil War, for instance, like if the Brits had gotten involved in one, what would that had changed? There's a book from 1967 called The Gate of Worlds, in which the Black Death of the 14th century apparently killed like 3/4 of the European population. They're positing like a much larger number of people were killed or taken out by the plague. And so then several centuries later, the main powers are Russia, Turkey, the Aztecs, Incas, and Japan.
Oh, wow.
And like, what would the world look like with something like that? There's all kinds of different ones. Like, okay, there's one by Keith Roberts called Pavan. Elizabeth I is assassinated. And then following that, the Spanish Armada is successful in suppressing Protestantism from moving forward. Like, a lot of like these things. And so a lot of them, I think, do talk about that, said, famous historical figures, like, that's it, 11/22/63 is looking at, like, if we prevented the Kennedy assassination, what would that do? And a lot of other ones are like, if we prevented just one entire war from happening, what would happen?
And I think this is, like, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about, like, we even reflect on this for our own lives. Like, if I had made a different decision, because we all have these points, right, where there's, like, a turning point, a fork in the road where you go one way versus another. And, like, we as a collective, like, in history have seen this happen many times. Yeah. And I think this is just, like, human nature to wonder about these things and be like, what would life have been like?
Yes,
if we had done it differently. And what I found with a lot of these alternate, endings or, like, sci-fi or whatnot, there seems to be this, like, dark grittiness that comes from it.
Oh, definitely.
Where, like, actually things aren't better if we did it differently.
So often these stories appear to function as a partial warning to, like, you don't know how much worse it could have been if this bad thing did not happen.
Right.
You know, that's it. If this assassination did not happen, if this war did not take place.
Yeah.
I think that there are very few... I guess there are very few times where an author will actually posit a situation in which, like, they'll be like, no, it would have been so much better if this had not have happened. And I guess, like, to an extent, I mean, like, a war is never really a good thing.
No.
But I can understand, maybe, especially, it would be rare for somebody to really write that, except maybe in very specific instances. Like, I would hazard a guess that some people might write that things would have been a lot better if Vietnam had never happened. That might be one of those. I think that people would be like,
kind of useless to do that one, you know?
Yeah, that's it.
Well, I mean, like, if you look at, like, Afghanistan and Iraq and all that, like, more recent ones, like, what was it for, you know?
What's it for right now? Look at what's happening in multiple places right now.
It's crazy, you know? And it's just like, what is it for, you know? Like, before it was disguised, and you could go back to, like, World War One, and it was very much similar, where you had just two governments having a tiff.
Yes.
And, you know, everybody had to get involved in it, and there was no point to the damn thing.
No, when you kind of dug down to the nitty-gritty of it, you're like, why the fuck are we doing this? Like, what is this?
Like, what was the point? Like, you know, I think there's this famous story about how on Christmas Day, in the trenches, the Brits played soccer with the Germans.
Yes.
Because, like, it's like, what are we doing this for?
Really, like, I personally am not mad at you about anything.
It's like, you don't stand for some, like, this is our governments, our, you know, whatever, they marched us in
argue.
Yeah,
about
whereas,
this.
like, World War II was something different.
Yeah, no, I know. That's true. And we'll save a lot of that, I think, for a future episode, because we're going to chat through some of that as well. But it's true that, depending on the conflict, I think that there you would find, probably if you looked through, you would find the occasional one, which would be the rare one, that I think an author would be like, yeah, you know what, maybe it would be really, really good if this one had just never happened.
Yeah. And there are stories about that as well. But again, it's that exploration. And it makes you wonder, right? Like, if you start going down that rabbit hole and exploring it, like, you know, and again, we talk about we're going to be talking about it in 11/22/63.
Yeah.
But it's like, if something happens or didn't happen, and we go down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out, you know, what would that actually do to our timelines? What would our world look like?
Yeah.
We kind of end up in this dark place where we're like, actually, things aren't better. They're a lot worse.
Actually, it's shit.
So maybe we should just not do this. And I don't know why we do that. Like, why do you think it always turns out dark and gritty?
Oof. I think it's because we're either aware of this, or in some cases, like, you know, people have lived through certain things, and I think that the unknown is so much more terrifying than what we've already experienced. Even if what we've experienced is bad, I think that we can't help it as people but to look back and be like, yeah, but how much worse could it be, you know?
Right. And like, hey, maybe I should, like, stop thinking that things would be better.
Yeah.
Because actually, inevitably, there would be other, like, domino effects in other ways.
For sure.
That are just a lot worse in the long term.
Yeah, that's it. I find, actually, there do seem to be the occasional ones from things that I've looked at. Like, there are definitely some, I would say, of, like, the alternate history books just in general that do a little bit less of the, you're, like, that's it. Like, it's always the ones, okay, how do I put this? I'm trying to think of how to phrase this properly. Okay, the ones that wind up being less heavy and have more levity to them and are, I guess, quote unquote, more fun to a degree, even if the subject matter isn't always, are generally the ones that have some sort of fantasy or magic element within them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like My Lady Jane is something that has a lot of levity to it because of the idea of, like, oh, well, magic exists in this world, and people are shapeshifters and they shapeshift into all kinds of, like, fun animals, and there's an interesting sort of aspect to that, you know. And there's a There's a series by an author named Naomi Novik, and the first novel is called His Majesty's Dragon, and one is
Napoleon with dragons.
Yeah, that's it. Right? Like, you know,
but there's no magic in that one.
Okay, fine.
It's
dragons,
just dragons.
Dragons are fantasy characters in my brain.
Agree.
Yeah. You know, there's the idea of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is set in the early 1800s in England. The Napoleonic War is occurring, and magicians exist, like actual magicians exist in this universe, and so the idea of like them coming out of hiding after a number of years is like a thing that exists. Anyway, it's just interesting. It's always the ones that are like, we have either magical abilities or there are fantastical creatures or non-existent, like whatever beings or whatever that exist in the story that are more fun.
Yeah.
But when you stick to the ones that are pure, like, this is just alternate history, it's always just like, oh, and it's so much fucking worse now.
Like,
made
always.
It so
like,
much worse.
The ones that go the route of, like, sci-fi, I find that it's always so much worse after.
Definitely.
You know? And you're just like, okay, well, like, this was kind of a half-fun concept, but now I'm depressed.
Yeah,
you know?
that's it. Granted, I guess you can still do the maybe some semi-fantasy element of it and make it more, I guess, keep it more serious still. Like, I think Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell still has quite a serious tone to it, unlike like My Lady Jane or something. And there's something like Dread Nation, which is another one, which is either like, I don't know, like a 2 or 3 book series. I think it's 2. I think it's like a duology anyway, which is set during like the Civil War basically, and posits the idea of zombies existing within the universe during that time and Gettysburg and everything. And like, what would that have done, obviously, to change the course of things?
It would have been a mess.
I'm pretty sure that humanity just wouldn't exist anymore if that were the case. Maybe it's me. Like, am I incorrect? Maybe I'm wrong and people would disagree with that, but I feel like it just wouldn't work.
I mean,
I don't know.
We even had, like, when we were trying to pick movies to watch this month.
Yes.
We even had a bit of a discussion about what actually constitutes alternate
history versus, again, let's say like historical fiction, right?
Yeah.
I think like we were like trying to list things quick, and we really quickly were like, oh, Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
Yeah.
And then I stopped and I was like, no, wait,
that's not a real story. Like, that's not actual historically correct. Like, that was just it was like alternate historical fiction.
Yes, basically, that's it. Exactly. Because, I mean, the original Pride and Prejudice story is a work of fiction. Yes, it's set during a time period, but even then, I wouldn't necessarily call Pride and Prejudice historical fiction because Jane Austen wrote it at the time in which it's set. She didn't write something from 70, 80, 100 years prior as well, right? So again, but it's so easy to get confused.
Yeah, because you're like, okay, first of all, how many freaking adaptations have we had of Pride and Prejudice? So many that at this point it actually feels like it's a real story.
It does.
Like a historical event.
Like you feel like the Bennets and Mr. Darcy are actual human beings who existed at some point.
Side note, they're making a new adaptation on Netflix.
Really?
Yeah, it was in the newsletter.
Oh god, I forgot about that.
I just read.
Fucking why?
I clicked on a link because the newsletter was like, we're making Netflix is adapting this extremely popular novel, and I'm like, ooh, what is it? Pride and Prejudice. I'm like, come on.
Are we not tired of that?
I'm so
I don't know.
Tired.
I don't know how anybody else feels about it. And I get it, whatever. And yes, I understand that we come from a place of slight bias because neither of us are massive Jane Austen fans, particularly. But at the same, even with that, dear God, dear Lord, could we please pick some of the other ones?
Well, I mean, it's like if they announced that they were making another Dracula adaptation, I'd be like, oh, not again.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so much already.
Yeah, there are so many of them. And yes, okay, even within that, can I be surprised and happy that BBC one from a few years ago was fucking fantastic.
That was awesome.
And I loved it.
We're good now. We've had the fantastic.
I know, and we've had it we've had it modern, we've had it period, we've had it a mix of both. We've done all
We've had a a movie about one chapter from Dracula, like a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah.
The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
It was very boring.
Yeah.
I watched it. It was very
it's
boring.
one chapter!
Exactly. And also that one chapter is very short, and it's legitimately the only thing that exists in that chapter is the captain's log.
Right.
From the ship.
Right.
As it crosses over, and slowly but surely, that's it. All of the crew dies. Mysteriously.
I actually reread that chapter specifically when that movie came out, because I'm like, hang on a second, how did they make an entire movie out of this shit? And I read the chapter,
a lot more
and
than
I'm
they
like,
needed to.
never mind.
No, not great at all, unfortunately. But yes, you're correct. It's true. Like, we're getting to the point now with certain very prominent pieces of literature that it's like, it's so much. It's so many adaptations of the same thing.
So much literature out there. Like, if you want to do something kind of like Pride and Prejudice, just take your pick. There's so many things you can adapt.
There are so many different things. And I mean, like, even in the same vein, there are so many, let's say that's it, like, literary alternate, like, kind of versions of stories that already exist, or alternate versions of Pride and Prejudice, for instance, or of Dracula, or of Frankenstein, or of all kinds of other really big things. I mean, Frankenstein, it doesn't bother me quite as much because there haven't been quite as many.
We need a new updated Bride of Frankenstein.
Ooh, that'd be good. Anyway, I think I need to look into it more. I've read, excuse me, that in 2025 there's meant to be a Wolfman coming out.
Oh, you will love that.
Yeah, I'll be really excited about that. Bring on the Universal monsters. Yeah, I can't wait until everything settles down after Universal gets their whole new park up and running, and they have the whole Dark Universe section, and I'm so fucking pumped.
We are going.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Because there's also new Harry Potter being added.
Yes, there's also a Ministry of Magic being added to it. Listen, I'm pumped. I'm excited. And also, like, I know this is all the way in November and stuff, and I'm like, I hope everyone in Florida is like, okay, I know that, like, getting hit with 2 hurricanes in one season so far, like, we're hitting this right after Milton's just passed through as well, and I'm really sorry that all that's happening this year, because what an unpleasant fall season for them to be having over there. It's really shitty.
Yeah. No, very much so. And we were in Florida last year in
October
around the time that Milton hit this year.
I think Helen maybe, or what was the one before Helene?
Helene.
Yeah.
And we just had great weather when we were there. Like, not too hot, not too cold. Like,
it barely rained over there.
Fantastic, so heart goes out to everybody over there.
Yeah, it's gonna be. I know it's gonna be like a hefty cleanup effort. So anyway, I hope everybody's okay over there. Anyway, sorry, tangent, but. I feel like, again, that's it. A lot of authors have taken it upon themselves to write these sort of, like, different versions of these very famous pieces of literature that were written a long time ago. So I don't see why we maybe couldn't adapt those, like those, like, different versions of it where either the person's modernized it or they've done something totally different, or it's simply based on, like, even taking that and adapting it would be something new and
like
different.
Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But at least taking that and doing something with it would be
absolutely.
Good.
Like, there's just so many things out there. Like, we've been so happy the last few years when there's been, like, The Fall of the House of Usher, Haunting of Hill House, like,
all of Mike Flanagan's.
Those were also great adaptations.
Like, we got to this October, and I was like, "Where's my fucking Mike Flanagan show that I didn't get this year?"
Because we've had like 3 in a row.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because we got Follow the House of Usher, we got Midnight Mass, we got Bly Manor, and Hill House.
Yeah, so we got 4 in a row.
Yeah.
Where is our
I think I saw that on TikTok the other day. Somebody just being like, me sitting in October waiting for my Mike Flanagan adaptation to drop, and then nothing happens, and I'm like, what the fuck?
Sad face.
I know. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah. But anyway, I find, you know what, I think that because of the tone, I will have a tendency to gravitate a little more towards the alternate history that does include some sort of magical realism or fantastical element, simply because perhaps I won't get to the end and be sad all the time.
I mean, that's why we don't do the sci-fi as much in the reading space. Like, I'll watch it, but reading it, oh.
Yeah, it can be pretty hefty.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna see what's happening. We're gonna see what's happening with us in the new year. Things are a cooking. We're working on some stuff for the new year that's gonna be a little different.
There might be quite a bit of sci-fi coming your way.
Yeah, there might be quite a bit of difference happening for anybody who's actually interested. Hey,
stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So, anyway, I'd love to know if you guys have read a lot of alternate history stories, and I don't know, do you prefer the ones that are maybe a little more fantastical, or would you actually rather the ones that really posit an idea of an actual alternate history based on one event or one person or something? I don't know, whatever the difference might be there. Let us know about that over on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at fullybookedca, and don't forget to head over to the website at fullybooked.ca and sign up for our newsletter. And until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.